Picture the most absolute ruler imaginable, a pharaoh of Egypt, a man his people literally worshipped as a living god, the sun of the sun itself. To disobey him wasn't just a crime, it was blasphemy against the universe. Now picture a small group of tired, hungry construction workers throwing down their tools, walking off the job, and telling that living god, no. Not in a legend, not in a movie, in a real documented event, written down by a scribe who watched it happen, on a papyrus you can still go and see today. 3,000 years before unions, before labor laws, before anyone had even invented the word strike, a crew of ancient Egyptian workers staged the first recorded strike in human history. And here's the part nobody expects. They won. This is the story of how it happened, who these men were, what finally pushed them over the edge, what they risked by defying a god king, and why a payroll dispute from 1157 BC still echoes in every picket line on Earth today. To understand why this was unthinkable, you first need to meet the workers. Because these weren't slaves. That's the first myth to throw away. They were the opposite, the most elite, most privileged craftsmen in all of Egypt. They lived in a special village called Deir el-Medina, tucked into the desert hills near the Valley of the Kings. Their job was the most sacred construction work in the world, carving and decorating the secret tombs of the pharaohs themselves. These were master stonecutters, sculptors, draftsmen, and painters. The men trusted with the king's eternal life. The state called them servants in the place of truth, and the state took care of them. They got houses, they got an 8-day work week with days off. They got servants to wash their laundry, doctors when they got sick, paid sick days, recorded by name in the attendance lists. And every month, they got wages. Not coins. Egypt had no money yet. Wages meant food. Sacks of emmer wheat for bread, barley for beer, plus fish, vegetables, water, firewood, and oil. The grain ration arrived every month from the state warehouses, and it was generous. By some calculations, a workman's monthly grain could feed his family and then some. The leftovers were his savings account. But notice what that means. These families had no fields, no herds, no backup. They lived in a desert village where every single loaf of bread depended on one thing: the government delivery showing up on time. For generations, it did. And then, it didn't. The year is around 1157 BC. The pharaoh is Ramesses III, by most accounts, the last truly great king of Egypt's golden age. But his Egypt is an empire in trouble. He has just fought off massive invasions, waves of mysterious raiders we call the Sea Peoples, wars that drained the treasury. Harvests are poor. Grain prices are climbing. The bureaucracy is bloated and leaking, and corrupt officials are skimming from the supply chains. The state is still pouring resources into temples and monuments, and somewhere in the accounting, somebody decides the tomb workers can wait. In the 29th year of Ramesses' reign, the grain ration to Deir el-Medina arrives late. Then later. Then it stops arriving at all. Now put yourself inside one of those small stone houses. Your pay is 20 days overdue. The jar where you store the wheat is showing its bottom. Your children eat smaller portions. Your wife is trading her jewelry for fish. And every morning, you're still expected to climb the cliff path into the Valley of the Kings and keep carving a luxurious eternal home for the man who isn't paying you. The workers complained through the proper channels. The foreman passed it up. The scribes wrote it down. Nothing happened. 18 days past payday. Nothing. And then one of them said the sentence that changed labor history forever. The scribe recorded the workers' words, and the spirit of them was simple. We are hungry. They counted the days past payday out loud, declared the situation unbearable. And then the whole crew did something with no precedent in 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization. They put down their tools. They walked out of the royal tomb. And they kept walking, right out of the Valley of the Kings, past their own village, down toward the great temples on the plain. The most trusted workmen in Egypt staged the world's first recorded walkout. Stop and feel how dangerous this was. There was no word for what they were doing. No law protected it, because no one had ever imagined it. These men were defying the divine order of the universe. Ma'at, the sacred balance the pharaoh embodied. They could have been flogged, mutilated, or executed as rebels, and their families left to starve. They had every reason to expect the worst. They marched anyway. They reached the mortuary temple of Thutmose III and staged a sit-in at its rear gate, choosing sacred ground on purpose, the ancient version of protesting on government property where everyone important would see them. The local officials were stunned. The scribe Amenacht, the man whose written record preserves this whole story, describes the chiefs coming out to listen to the workers shouting their grievances. The workers' message, preserved in his account, is devastatingly simple. Hunger and thirst have driven us to this. There is no clothing, no oil, no fish, no vegetables. Send to Pharaoh, our good lord. Write to the vizier, our superior, that we may be given our rations. In other words, we don't want a revolution. We want our paycheck. The officials panicked. Nothing in their training covered this. They scraped together some pastries from the temple stores and handed them out. The first recorded attempt in history to end a strike with snacks. The workers took the pastries and stayed on strike. The next day they marched again, this time to the temple of Ramesses II, the grandest on the plain. They occupied its precinct. One account even has them threatening to start telling the truth out loud about what was happening inside the royal administration, which, in a state built on sacred order, was a threat the officials understood perfectly. Day after day, the standoff dragged on. Walkouts, sit-ins, negotiations. The men went back to work when partial rations appeared, then walked out again when the deliveries failed again. At one point, the workers crossed the line nobody thought they'd cross. They marched toward the granaries themselves. The unspoken message: if the state won't pay us, we'll collect. And here is the astonishing thing. The state blinked. No mass executions, no mutilations, no rebel trials. The authorities, up to the level of the vizier, the pharaoh's right hand, chose to negotiate with their own workforce. The back rations were rounded up and delivered. The men returned to their chisels. The tomb of Ramesses III got finished. The workers had stared down a god-king's government over a missed paycheck, and won. Why did they win? Because without meaning to, they had discovered the one law of labor that still runs the world. Skilled workers are not replaceable. You cannot train a new master tomb carver in a week. The pharaoh's eternal life, in Egyptian belief, his actual survival in the afterlife, depended on these exact men finishing that exact tomb. The workers of Deir el-Medina had leverage before anyone had a word for leverage. All they had to do was notice it. And once they noticed, they never forgot. The records show the strikes weren't a one-time event. Whenever the rations failed in the years that followed, and in Egypt's slow decline, they failed again and again. The tools went down. Strikes flickered through the village for decades, under later kings, becoming almost routine. The world's first strike turned into the world's first strike wave. The scribe Amenacht rolled up his papyrus, and it survived the fall of Egypt, the rise of Greece and Rome, and 3,000 years of history. Today it sits in a museum in Turin, Italy, which is why historians call it the Turin Strike Papyrus. A government document written by a government scribe, faithfully recording the day the government lost an argument with its own employees. So strip away the temples and the gods one more time, and look at what actually happened in that desert valley. Workers did everything right and still didn't get paid. Managers shrugged. The pay was late, the excuses were endless, and the families went hungry while the budget went to monuments. And a group of ordinary people discovered that the only voice the system would listen to was silence. The silence of tools not moving. Every strike since, every walkout, every picket line, every union vote in history is an echo of that moment. The dock workers of Rome, the printers of Paris, the miners, the factory hands, the screenwriters, the pilots. None of them knew it, but they were all quoting a crew of hungry tomb carvers from 1157 BC. We like to think workers' rights are a modern invention, something born in smoky factories 2 centuries ago. They're not. The very first time human beings organized work itself, in the very first great civilization, the very first thing workers had to fight for was simply getting paid what they were promised. Some things, it turns out, are older than the pyramid's shadow. The boss who delays your paycheck, the official who promises it's coming, and the quiet, world-changing power of people who finally say, "Not until you pay us." 3,000 years ago, a hungry stonecutter put down his chisel and refused to pick it up. Every worker on Earth has been holding a little of his leverage ever since.